Between 2011 and 2014, a sales assistant at Morgan Stanley's Manhattan office conducted nearly 6,000 searches on confidential client records he had no legitimate reason to access. He uploaded data on 730,000 accounts to a personal server. He did this across 3 years, from inside the firm's own systems, using access his role formally granted him. The breach was eventually discovered when the data appeared online for sale. Morgan Stanley was fined $1 million by the SEC. Galen Marsh was sentenced to probation and ordered to pay $600,000 in restitution. The investigation found that Morgan Stanley had failed to adopt proper precautions to check and stop unauthorized data access. But underneath that finding is something more specific. Marsh's role as a sales assistant granted him access to wealth management client records across the firm. Not the records of clients he served, not the records of his branch, but a significant portion of the entire division's customer base. The role-based access control system worked as configured. The configuration was the problem. Role-based access control, RBAC, is the dominant permission model across enterprise systems. Its logic is straightforward. Instead of assigning permissions to individual users, you define roles, attach permissions to those roles, and assign users to roles. A financial advisor role gets access to client records. A systems administrator role gets access to infrastructure. A read-only auditor role gets access to logs. When someone joins the organization, you assign them a role. When they leave, you remove it. At scale, this is dramatically easier to manage than per-user permission assignment, and that manageability was the specific problem RBAC was designed to solve. It solved that problem. What it did not solve, and was never designed to solve, is the question of context within a role. Marsh's role legitimately required access to client records. The system had no mechanism to express that a sales assistant in a Manhattan branch requires access to records for clients at that branch, not records for clients across a division of 3.5 million. Context like that, which records, under which circumstances, relative to which relationships, is not a dimension RBAC can model. Roles are binary. You have the role or you do not. Once you have it, the access it carries is total. The engineers who designed RBAC knew this. The limitation is not an oversight, it is a design trade-off. Modeling context accurately enough to constrain access within roles would make the system too complex to administer at scale. RBAC trades contextual precision for operational manageability. That trade-off was the right choice for the problem it was solving. It also creates a predictable gap, and that gap has a shape. Attribute-based access control, ABAC, was built to fill it. Instead of assigning roles, ABAC evaluates attributes, properties of the user, properties of the resource, properties of the environment at the time of the request. A nurse should access patient records only for patients currently assigned to their ward. ABAC can express that. It evaluates the relationship between the requester's department attribute, the resource's assigned ward attribute, and the request time attribute of current shift. It can model precisely the kind of contextual constraint that RBAC cannot. What ABAC cannot do is remain comprehensible at scale. Attribute policies compound. Each new resource type, each new user category, each new environmental condition adds to the policy set. In large organizations, ABAC policies reach a complexity at which no single team has a complete view of what the policy set actually permits. The gap ABAC creates is not contextual precision, it has that. The gap is auditability. When a breach occurs, determining which policies enabled the access and whether they were correctly defined can take weeks. Relationship-based access control, ReBAC, addresses a different gap again. Where RBAC models roles and ABAC models attributes, ReBAC models relationships directly. A user can edit a document because they own it, or because they are a member of a group that owns it, or because someone who owns it has explicitly shared it with them. Google's internal authorization system, Zanzibar, is a ReBAC implementation. The model is expressive. It can capture the nuance of how access actually works in systems where ownership, delegation, and sharing are the natural units of permission. The gap ReBAC creates is definitional. The model is only as accurate as the relationship graph underlying it. When the graph is incomplete, when relationships exist in practice that have not been modeled, the system grants access that reflects the defined graph, not the real one. In complex organizations where reporting lines shift, teams restructure, and resources change ownership, keeping the relationship graph current is an ongoing operational problem, not a solved one. 3 models, 3 different gaps. Each one a direct response to the failure of the model before it. The pattern here is worth naming. Every permission model makes a design trade-off between expressiveness and manageability. More expressiveness, more precise contextual control, requires more complexity to define and maintain. More manageability, simpler to administer at scale, requires coarser-grained access that cannot capture context. The gap that creates is not incidental. It is the cost of the trade-off, and attackers find it in exactly the shape the model's designers predicted. Knowing which model governs a system tells you, with considerable precision, where to look for the gap. The more useful question is whether the people responsible for securing that system have looked there first.